What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for The Flash Season 5, Episode 8, titled What's Past is Prologue, the 100th episode of the show. And since it is the 100th episode, they tend to do a tribute episode, at least in the Arrowverse. I don't know about other TV shows, but the Arrowverse so far has been doing tribute episodes every 100 episodes. Like Arrow did one back in Season 5, Episode 8 of that show, and that was a great episode. But the reason this episode is even better is because it's not held down by the fact that it is a crossover episode. Because it isn't, that's the main reason they pushed back the crossover to Episode 9 of this year, because back in Invasion, the fact that the Arrow tribute episode was inside of Invasion held back the crossover just a little bit. It was a great episode, but it wasn't really an Invasion episode. It was more an Arrow tribute episode. So now they pushed back Elseworlds, which I think was a pretty good idea. In fact, it was a great idea because it makes the crossover better, and it makes this episode better as well because, again, it's not held down by the crossover. So I'll go over why I think this episode is so good in this review. First of all, I think that the concept of this episode is pretty genius. It's a pretty genius way to really pay tribute to the show. The concept is Barry and Nora go back in time to the first 3 seasons of the show to collect some items. I thought that was a pretty genius way to integrate the previous seasons and the show in general into this storyline and into this episode. They obviously can't do the same thing on Arrow, which is on Arrow they did this virtual reality thing, a completely different thing, which I thought was also a pretty great idea. So I do like that these two tribute episodes, which by the way are both Season 5, Episode 8, I do like that they have different concepts, and I think The Flash is especially good. It's a genius way to integrate the past events of The Flash into this episode. Obviously, the concept of the episode isn't everything. They have to execute it as well, and they definitely executed it really well. Another thing is that this episode had just one storyline. In the episode, it had absolutely no side plots, which, again, side plots are necessary to the show to push forward development of characters and storylines. But whenever you have one of these episodes without a side plot, it makes the episode so much better. For instance, just a couple of weeks ago when Arrow Season 7, Episode 7 came out, that was an incredible episode, and a big part of it was the fact that it was just one storyline. Now you have The Flash Season 5, Episode 8, which is just one storyline, and it makes the episode so much better. It's so much more cinematic. It just builds the momentum and the tension of the episode without just diverting to a different storyline. It makes the episode so much better, and I think this episode is a big example of that. So, about the actual main storyline and only storyline of this episode, which was Barry and Nora going back to the first 3 seasons of the show and collecting these items to turn off the lightning dagger in present day. And first of all, everything leading up to that in the episode, although it was probably the worst part of the episode, that's not saying much whatsoever. The rest of the episode was amazing, and this part was pretty great as well. I did like when Nora came up with the plan. Basically, everybody just talking to each other about what they should do and what they can do against Cicada. It felt like it very naturally led to Nora thinking of this plan, which obviously led to the entire episode, so that was pretty good. Also, Barry being a little hesitant to let Nora go back with him, that was great as well. It made a lot of sense. It was explained later why he actually didn't want Nora to go back in the past, which I think was mentioned in the synopsis, so that was kind of spoiled. Obviously not the biggest spoiler ever, but it was something. So obviously the first couple minutes before they actually go back in time, worst part of the episode, but it was pretty great nonetheless. And that brings us to the actual time travel part of the episode. For the purpose of this review, I'll go over each season separately. For instance, I'll go over Season 3, what I thought about that part of the episode, then Season 2, and then Season 1. So let's begin with Season 3. So they went back to the season finale of Season 3 to retrieve a part of Savitar's suit. The way they went about that was not really all too crazy or anything. Like, I do appreciate the fact that basically the way they divided up the screen time for these villains is the one that people love the most, Reverse Flash, had a lot of screen time. Then Zoom had a pretty good amount of screen time in that one scene, and then Savitar had no screen time whatsoever, or at least new screen time whatsoever, which I do think they know what people like and what people don't like in terms of the villains. People didn't like Savitar nearly as much as Zoom and Reverse Flash. If you do, that's fine. I'm talking about the general consensus of these villains. People didn't like Zoom as much as Reverse Flash, but people did like Zoom much more than Savitar, and people love Reverse Flash. So basically the way they split up the screen time for these three is the more people like a character, the more screen time we're giving them. So in Season 3, Savitar didn't really get any much screen time in this episode, which is fine. That's not really a big deal. I wasn't really itching to see Savitar return. Really, the character I wanted to see return the most was Zoom. I'll get to that in a second. But Savitar, I think the whole Season 3 part of the time travel was also easily the worst part of the time travel. But again, it was pretty awesome. You could tell that every single part I'm talking about here, it's getting better and better, and that is definitely true. And I did like the time wraith in this part. I did like the whole scene where Nora had to get the the shard of Savitar's suit back to the Speed Force. That was a cool part. In general, this part, even though it wasn't amazing or anything, it was pretty great nonetheless. And that brings me to the Season 2 part of this episode. For one thing I'll say is that I was a little disappointed by how much screen time Zoom got. It wasn't really much. It was basically just one scene with a commercial break in between. So if you want to call that 2 scenes, that's fine. But Zoom, the reason I want to see him return the most out of these villains is because Savitar, I don't like him as much, so I just didn't want to see him as much return. I don't really care that he didn't return outside of the old footage. And for Reverse Flash, although I do like him more than Zoom, we already have seen him return so many times. He returned in Season 2, 3, 4. He's returning in Season 5. In fact, he already has, and he was the main villain of a whole season of Legends of Tomorrow, so he has returned quite a lot. I'm not complaining about that. It's pretty awesome. But Zoom, we've only seen him return as the Black Flash, so I was excited to see him return in this episode the most. And though he didn't really get much screen time, the screen time he had was awesome. Whenever he has his mask down, it is incredible. Zoom, when he has his mask down, is easily the most threatening, menacing, scary villain on this show, maybe in the Arrowverse in general. I forgot how awesome Zoom was when his mask is down. When his mask is up, not as cool, but that wasn't really much of that in the episode. But when his mask is down, when he's wearing the mask, it is incredible. The music in the background, I forgot how awesome his music was from this season. Zoom return obviously was the character I wanted to see return the most, like I said, and even though we didn't get as much screen time as I wanted, the screen time we got with him was incredible, and not the best part of the episode because it wasn't very long, but it was awesome to see Zoom return. And that brings me to Season 1, the part where they went back to Episode 11 of Season 1 and Episode 1 of Season 1. This was easily the best part of the whole time travel aspect of this episode, and because a big part of that was Tom Cavanaugh, also a big part of that was the tribute to these episodes. They were done so much better than the first 2 seasons were done. So first of all, in episode 11, which is where they went back to in this episode, I did like the callback that he actually went back to this episode last time as well, back in Season 2, a whole 3 years ago, so that was a cool callback. And the fact that 2 different Barry Allens went back to this episode, that was crazy. But anyway, I think that the conversations between Nora Barry and Eobard Thawne were really, really good. I forgot how good Tom Cavanaugh could be in these intense scenes. For instance, in this episode, in the part where he learned, or he didn't really learn, he came to the conclusion that he will not be making it home with his plan. His plan just won't succeed in this season. That was incredible. Tom Cavanaugh really knocked it out of the park in that episode. And the reason I think I usually don't like Tom Cavanaugh in this role, not because he's bad at all. In fact, he's amazing. But it's just the fact that it doesn't make sense that it is Tom Cavanaugh. It makes more sense that it is Matt Letcher in, for instance, Crisis on Earth X, and at the end of this episode, which I will go over later in this review, as opposed to this episode in episode 11, or episode 11 of this episode, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't make sense that he would be Matt Letcher, so this just makes it so much better. I feel like I just I automatically don't like it when Tom Cavanaugh returns as Reverse Flash when it doesn't make any sense, while here, the fact that he is Reverse Flash when it does make sense, it is awesome. And I do think that every time they went to another episode, it just got better than the last. They went to the season finale, Season 3. That was pretty good. Then they went to episode, I think, 15 of Season 2, or I think 18, actually. I don't really remember, but that was pretty great. Then they went to episode 11 of season 1, and that was awesome. And then they went to episode 1 of season 1, and it is incredible. This was easily the best part of the episode. You have the revelation to Nora that Reverse Flash actually killed Nora, her grandmother, the person that she's named after, and that was a great scene. It was a pretty emotional scene at that, and it really played into the end of the episode, which again I will go over later in this review, although it does seem like this review will be a pretty long video. But anyway, that was pretty awesome. There was also a Legion of Superheroes reference. In that reference, in the time vault, Gideon was about to say the fact that Nora is a member of the rebooted Legion, and then Barry cut her off. The same thing he did all the way back in episode 20 of season 1, where she was about to say that he was a founding member of the Justice League, and he just cut her off after she said the and then in a comic version of this, it said the Justice. So, I don't know why, he likes doing that a lot, but I thought this was an incredible reference. Also, maybe a tease for Elseworlds, where Earth 1 and Earth 38 will, I think there's a 50% chance, as of right now, that they will combine. The fact that the Legion of Superheroes even exists on Earth 1, while they also exist on Earth 38, doesn't really make sense at this point. That's only in the future, so maybe there's a combination next week of these two universes. Also, the fact that they said the rebooted Legion of Superheroes, I think, is a reference to the comics, where the Legion of Superheroes have been rebooted like 10 times in the past, like really rebooted. One thing I forgot to mention, while Nora and Barry were entering the Time Vault, there was a conversation between Harrison Wells, aka Eobard Thawne, and Cisco Ramon, which I thought was unnecessary development for season 1, but at the same time, it was amazing that they did this. It wasn't necessary because season 1 has been over for a long time now, so that season, you can't really change that season at all at this point, but I do really appreciate this conversation, even though technically, yes, it is unnecessary because the friendship between these two that developed in the first season was developed well, and that season is over for a while now, but I do really appreciate it. I thought it was great. It really developed, and I keep on saying develop, but that's just what they did here. They basically retroactively developed this dynamic between the two that didn't really need any more assistance because it was a great dynamic, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So this episode is a tribute episode. Obviously a bunch of characters returned, which was awesome, a bunch of plot points returned, which was awesome, and a bunch of themes for the show, a bunch of major themes, especially from season 1, returned in this episode, but I don't think any part of the episode was as good a tribute to the show as the particle accelerator explosion, the part or the scene, the event that started the whole show in the first place. This scene showed every major character that was affected by the explosion. It showed Ronnie and Stein being affected, being turned into Firestorm. It showed Barry being turned into the Flash, complete with even new footage of Harrison Wells obviously being very happy that his whole plan, at least his plan back then, succeeded, and he created the Flash. It also showed the Martin brothers as well as DeVoe, which I do think the fact that DeVoe returned for this episode, at least in the footage we've seen in the past from this day, that was pretty awesome. The fact that he wasn't in the trailer at all made me think that he wasn't going to be in the episode at all, while Savitar is, even though those two characters got basically the same amount of screen time with no new footage, so that was fine, and all of this was happening while the Flash or Barry was hugging Nora. I thought this was an awesome tribute to the show, showing every major character on the Flash who was affected by the particle accelerator. That was affected by the particle accelerator explosion. This was a great perspective on this night, including all the major characters that was affected, and I think was a great tribute and a great circle around from the first to the 100th episode back to the first episode, and the first thing that started the show, which was the particle accelerator explosion, and I thought that was awesome. So the big reason they actually went back to the past was to face off against Cicada. I really like the fact that instead of bringing the item that they brought back to the present day, they put it in the hospital wall to use later, and they left it there for 5 years. I did like that quite a lot. I also liked the part where Cisco threw Mjolnir, or whatever you want to call it, the lightning dagger, into space. That was pretty awesome, although I think it would have been so cool if he sent it into a different dimension so that Cicada can't get it back, but then he summons it and it uses, it goes through dimensions with that summon. I really wonder if he could actually do that. That would have been cool to see, but sending it into space was pretty cool as well. Even though when the lightning dagger came back to Earth at basically light speed, because it took less than a second for it to go from space to Earth, which is insane. We don't even know how far in space it was. But anyway, it came back to Earth and it did absolutely no damage whatsoever, which is weird. Then the fight scene was pretty good. Then Killer Frost came back, which was a pretty good moment. There were two things, and they both have to do with Cicada, that I didn't like in this episode. They will not retract from the score because I don't think I can actually give this episode anything less than the score I will give it. I don't feel right doing that, but this two things, although they are minor, they are major for this character. So one of them is that it's revealed that he wants to kill himself after he kills all the other metahumans, and now after that, instead of feeling like a guy who just wants revenge on the people who killed his sister, brother-in-law, and put his niece, who he considers a daughter, in a coma, after that, he just now sounds like, or feels like, a suicidal guy who is really angry at the world. In this case in particular, a suicidal guy who is really angry at metahumans. So that's something that I don't think was a good thing for the character. I don't think they should have made him a metahuman in particular. They should have just made him a guy who has a meta object. Then they could go around the fact that he doesn't really need to kill himself. And secondly, the second thing that I didn't like in this episode is that when Killer Frost showed up, which was a cool moment, the reveal that she is not affected by the lightning dagger, he just flew away, which is stupid to me. I think that they did that to really manufacture and fabricate some sort of advantage for Team Flash, but they already did that with all the things they had in this episode. The reason they went back to the past was to create an advantage for Team Flash, and then Killer Frost just showed up out of nowhere with a fabricated advantage that didn't make any sense to me. The fact that Cicada ran away from Killer Frost was stupid because he has the power of Thor. He can defeat Killer Frost. I don't mean the power of Thor like literally he got powers from Thor, but he has the same powers as Thor, although probably to a lower degree. I mean, did you see Thor in Infinity War? But I do think that he can obliterate Killer Frost pretty easily. So that's one or two things, and they're both about Cicada, that I didn't like in this episode. Then we get to the reveals in this episode, the Nora Allen reveal, which is what the episode or the season was building up to in this season, when Sherlock investigated her all the way back then, thinking that maybe she didn't come here alone. And that was a pretty great moment, and that was expanded upon in this episode, and it really resolved in this episode when Sherlock investigated her again. That was a pretty intense moment, and then it was revealed, where she went back to 2049, that she is working with Eobard Thawne, which I do think after, throughout the episode that was hinted at, and I was expecting that by the end, where she was touching the costume when they went back to season 2, episode 1, and when she looked at the costume after that, or the case where the costume used to be. I think that this wasn't an unexpected twist, but it was a pretty great twist nonetheless. Who knows, maybe Reverse Flash will be the main villain again in this season, and Cicada will be pushed aside. I don't know what I feel about that, but we will have to see. One thing I said earlier that I don't like about this reveal is that Tom Cavanagh is Reverse Flash. Again, I love Tom Cavanagh as Eobard Thawne, but it just does not make any sense whatsoever that he is playing Eobard Thawne in these episodes, outside of the parts where they go back to season 1. So, in conclusion, this episode had a great through-line storyline, and just one storyline at that. It was an incredible tribute to this show, some great moments and great returning characters that I love to see. Again, some moments I didn't like. There were one or two things I didn't like. Obviously, I mentioned those things, but in general, it feels wrong to me to not give this episode the rating that I think it deserves, which is a 10 out of 10. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching. So anyway, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.